previous videos, we mentioned about giving presentations for the assignment. Several recommendations were given for you to better prepare your presentations, giving presentations in a professional manner with high levels of confidence, and ensure the audience to understand the content of your presentations. We also mentioned about the priority in terms of the presentations, which is focusing on the effectiveness in terms of the delivery of the message to the audience. You must ensure the audience able to understand the content of your presentations. Due to the limitations of the presentations, in terms of the time allocated for the presentations, as well as the limited durations of time that the slide is being introduced to the audience, that quickly require the audience to comprehend the content, it is your obligations as a presenter to help the audience to comprehend. And your focus of the discussions should be at the macro level in terms of the structures or the organizations of the content, as well as on the things which is easily remembered by the audience, such as the concept and principles. The informations, details, numbers, data and results are something which is quite hard to digest, and normally these informations are given to imply something, and this need to be clearly indicated to the audience. Those informations, numbers, data and results will serve as the evidence as well as supporting informations to whichever that you're going to discuss during the presentations. You should put your emphasis right. You don't expect yourself to cover every single details covered in the design report. It should only consist of about 30 to 50% of the most essentials. Now let us proceed with our discussions in terms of the common mistakes as well as some recommendations associated with the presentation slides as well as the verbal presentations. First, you will need to use the graphic when it is necessary. The graphics serve to complement the understandings of the audience. Those which is irrelevant, simply meant for aesthetical purposes, are not necessary, as you are talking about the technical presentations, where the major functions of the slides is to carry the informations which is difficult or lengthy when you need to explain it through conversations. Next, you should properly utilize the space in the slides. Your slides should look neat, and there shouldn't be too much blank in your slides, where you have a lot of space but only a little areas is being used with limited size of the font. Your usage of the slide in terms of the space should be more or less adequate, and your slide should look quite clean, not to be too messy. Normally, you will need to ensure the texts are positioned within the standard frame among different slides. For example, you have a consistent alignment of the slides, consistent positions of the title, and consistent place where you're going to start with your first text. And when you flip along different slides, you don't see the text jumping here and there, as this is going to be rather distracting. One of the common mistakes related to the slides is the inappropriate font type and size used in the presentation slides. Normally, we don't use Times New Roman for presentation slides due to poor resolutions of the LCD projector when it is being displayed onto the screen. And the Times New Roman, the fonts are rather thin. Due to poor resolutions, the words might not be clear to the audience. Normally, we will use Arial, as the aspect ratios of the alphabets are just nice, and there are no sharp corners on the text. And when it is being displayed over the screen, the words are more easily visible. You will need to limit the numbers of size of the font, normally not more than 3 font size, which if you observe from this slide here, there are only two font sizes. One is for the presentations as the title, another one it would be for the normal text. Sometimes when you need to incorporate a lot of information in the slide, you may use a smaller font size, and it needs to be more or less consistent, not to be significantly different from the font size. In fact, I would say that the font size that I use for my presentation slide here can be considered rather small. You may increase a bit. However, due to my habit of presentations, I like everything to be presented in one slide. Then I'm going to discuss one by one in details. This one, it will be dependent on your strategies. If you are doing the presentations in front of a large audience, probably the font size that I use here will not be sufficient for the audience sitting at the back to easily read my text. Therefore, most likely slightly larger font size will be used. And you will need to make sure the differences in terms of the font size shouldn't be too significant. You know that you use larger font size as a method to emphasize something. But if you use it extremely large as compared to the other texts, the emphasis will seem to be more aggressive. This you will need to take into the considerations. Another common mistake related to the slide is that the slide is full of text, no emphasis, or all the texts are fully emphasized. In fact, it is not normal to have the slide filled with text. I have to admit this. I have overdone this. If you have so many texts here, it is difficult to emphasize some important points. Probably you can do some emphasis by bolding some text in order to draw the attention of the audience on certain important point. Sometimes we also see the presentation slides where there are too many emphases, as if throughout the slides, so many important points being highlighted or being bold. This will be similar to not giving emphasis on the slides. When everything is bolded, there is no contrast between those which is not bold. That means you also lose the emphasis. On that sense, when you need to do some emphasis, you need to make sure it is not that frequent. You only give emphasis to those which is worthy, not everything to be emphasized. Another problem with the slide, it is related to the figures. It is either the figures is too small or the text is too small. It is too blurry. Try to avoid print screen. The text is unclear, probably due to poor resolutions, the overlaying labels, unnecessary lines, as well as the font size which is inconsistent to the normal text. This usually happens among our students. First, if you can reproduce the figures, you're going to draw it line by line. You might not be able to draw as beautiful as the one you have from the references, but the good thing about it is you can reproduce the figures, incorporate those which is only relevant to you, adding or removing certain things in the figures so that it fits nicely to your presentations. And also you can control the font size to be consistent to the normal text. The contrast is there and it is easy for the audience to read it. Some of this cannot be achieved through printing screen or adopting the figures from your references. Probably the focus of the discussions by the original references is not the same as yours, which the original figures may put emphasis on something which is not really relevant to you. If you want a full control of the figures, you may consider to reproduce yourself, custom-made it, and make it perfectly fit to your situations. Next, you need to be consistent in terms of positioning of the title, text area, as well as the line spacing. Like what I said previously, ensure the texts are properly aligned. The positions of titles is at the constant positions. As you flick through the slides, everything seems to be standardized and the audience will feel comfortable throughout your presentations. The next problem with the slide is the slide is not self-explanatory. This normally happens when there is only figures or tables on the slide. By looking at the tables and figures, it will be as if you are giving the raw data to the audience. You cannot expect the audience to comprehend or to think in the directions which you intended to. Normally, it should be highlighted. What are the focus of your discussions in the slides? You need to imagine in the situation that the audience missed your conversations during the presentation, but the audience can read your slides. You need to ensure the audience can still keep up with your presentations by just reading your slides. Next, we look at the common mistake as well as the recommendations for the presentation part. Mind your filler words. This normally happens among the students, even among the lecturers, which unintentionally will have some filler words such as and, okay, and all those. And this kind of filler words will repeatedly appear in the presentations every now and then, and this can be rather distracting to the audience. Unless you intentionally to remove those words, it will accompany you forever. You will have to practice it more often and try to refrain yourself to have those filler words being spoken. Another one is that the presenter completely reading the slides. You shouldn't do that. That means you are not well prepared. You don't know what you are presenting. Probably you don't bother also whether the audience can understand your presentations. If you have a habit, probably due to whichever reason, maybe you are nervous, maybe you are unfamiliar with your presentations, then you read the slides. You have to change this habit. You can practice your presentations before you actually do the presentations. Record your presentations and replay your presentations. See if there are any things that you can improve. Observe if you have any filler words, or see how you read your slides. You will find yourself as an audience very disengaged when the presenter is reading the slides. It is not really helping with the presentations. Next, you will need to make clear the purpose and the message of the presentations. We are talking about the macro level in terms of the content of the presentations. You need to put the audience in the same wavelength, that they know what you are trying to do, what is the purpose that you made those statements, why you present it so. Only when the audience can understand the purpose, they will get the focus on the area which you intend to emphasize. Also, mind the statement that you have made during your presentations. This also normally happened. I give you an example for this. The statement was, we decided not to provide shear reinforcement. What is actually meant by the presenter is that the shear reinforcement is not required, thus it is not provided. You see, although these two statements look similar, but they carry different meanings. The first statement means that it is as if the shear reinforcement is required, but you choose not to provide the shear reinforcement. And the second statement here, it is talking about you know that the shear reinforcement is not required, therefore it is not provided. The meaning is different. Therefore, you have to carefully construct every statement that you made during your presentation. Again, you will need to practice your presentations. If possible, you record it and then replay it, and then try to look into every single statement that you made during the presentations. Is it going to give wrong information? Is it going to confuse the audience? Is it really precise in terms of the message that you would like to deliver? These are the things that you need to consider. Next, you need to bear in mind that there are differences between different modes of presentations, which include the in-person presentations virtual presentations, and recorded videos presentations. I guess nowadays, the presentations is no longer limited to in-person presentations. Sometimes we have online classes, there will be virtual presentations, and sometimes due to the popularity of the YouTube channels, recorded video is another mode of presentation. There are significant differences between the mode of presentations, which include their advantage and their limitations. You should fully apply the advantage of those presentation mode and try to avoid the limitations of those presentations. Next, be careful when you use the microphone, not to speak too closely to the microphone, as there is going to be noise due to airflow when you are speaking or when you are breathing. You may not notice that, but it is very obvious among the audience. Always try to cross-check that. Next, in your presentations, you will need to demonstrate your awareness of the local practice and the practical solutions. This one is more related to the technical side, and it demonstrates to the audience that you really know what you are doing and you have taken a broader scope in terms of the considerations. You know that there's always some limitations in the presentation slides. There will also be some limitations in terms of the written report. Sometimes it will be quite advantageous when you discuss about the local practice as well as the practical solutions, which is more effective for the audience to understand as compared when it is written. Then you will use the presentations to complement the limitations of the other modes of representations, such as in the written reports. And there is one more thing, being a presenter and as a student, most of the time you are an audience. Most likely you've been through a lot of presentations, which you like and you dislike, which in your perceptions, good presentations and poor presentations, which you also observe yourself, sometimes very attentive to the presentations, sometimes is unable to pay attention, or sometimes you find yourself not really understanding what is being presented. You have a vast experience as an audience, but you might not have sufficient experience in terms of giving presentations as a presenter. What you can do here is try not to replicate the presentations that you disliked or you are unable to pay attention, because you're going to end up more or less similar to the situations that you actually experience it, which is not interested, not paying attention, or even if you want to pay attention, you don't really get the content. You can learn from the presentations that you attend previously. What are the good characteristics of the presentations? You try to adopt it. What are the poor presentations in your perception? Try to avoid it.